This is clear proof that narcissists are trying to sabotage your life. Have you ever wondered what truly drives a narcissist? The strange mix of confidence and cruelty, charm and coldness that leaves so many people feeling confused, hurt, and questioning their own reality after interacting with them. Psychologists often say that understanding narcissistic behavior requires stepping beyond the surface. At first glance, narcissists can appear simply arrogant, selfish, or difficult. Yet beneath those outward behaviors lies a far more complex psychological story. Many people who have lived, worked, or grown up around someone with strong narcissistic traits describe the same unsettling experience. The person seems obsessed with admiration, deeply sensitive to criticism, and strangely indifferent to the emotional needs of others. According to clinical psychology, these characteristics are commonly associated with narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, a personality structure marked by an inflated sense of self-importance, an intense craving for praise, and a limited capacity for stable empathy. But psychologists emphasize that these traits are not merely personality quirks. They often develop as psychological defenses formed long before adulthood. To understand narcissistic motivation, researchers frequently look back to early life experiences. Developmental psychologists have long observed that narcissistic personality patterns often emerge in environments where emotional development becomes distorted. In some cases, children grow up in households where they are excessively praised and rarely given boundaries. In other cases, the opposite occurs. The child grows up under relentless pressure, criticism, or unrealistic expectations. Both environments can produce a fragile psychological structure. Psychologists sometimes describe the narcissistic personality as a defended self, a person who learned early in life that their worth depends on appearing exceptional. Beneath the grandiosity often lies a deeply vulnerable sense of identity. This fragile inner world is one reason narcissists react so intensely to perceived threats or imperfections. This does not excuse harmful behavior, but it helps explain it. Many narcissists carry what psychologists call a fragile ego structure. Their self-esteem may look inflated on the outside, yet internally it is unstable and easily threatened. When their self-image is challenged, they may lash out at those closest to them. Paradoxically, the cruelty that victims experience often reflects the narcissist's own internal shame. Some psychologists describe this pattern as shame-driven aggression. The narcissist cannot tolerate feeling flawed, so they project that discomfort outward by attacking, belittling, or devaluing others. Unfortunately, the people who care about them, partners, friends, children, or colleagues, often become the targets of these defensive reactions. For victims, this dynamic can feel deeply confusing. Psychologists frequently see partners of narcissists trying harder and harder to offer love, validation, or reassurance, hoping that enough affection will soften the narcissist's behavior. In some situations, narcissists do temporarily respond to admiration or attention. When they feel emotionally reinforced, they may become warmer or more cooperative. But this improvement is rarely stable. The moment the narcissist perceives a flaw, criticism, or disappointment, the warmth can quickly disappear. Psychologists explain that narcissistic relationships often operate on a conditional system. Admiration leads to approval, while perceived imperfection triggers rejection. This pattern becomes especially painful when the narcissist discovers weaknesses in someone close to them. In healthy relationships, learning about another person's vulnerability often deepens empathy and intimacy. For narcissistic personalities, the opposite may occur. Once they notice flaws, they may suddenly lose interest, withdraw emotionally, or begin treating the person with contempt. Psychologists believe this reaction stems from the narcissist's need to maintain an idealized self-image. If someone close to them reflects imperfection, it threatens the illusion of perfection they rely on psychologically. To protect themselves, they distance, devalue, or discard the person. One of the most common motivations behind narcissistic behavior is the relentless pursuit of success and superiority. Psychologists often describe narcissistic thinking as black and white cognition. In their internal world, there are only two positions, extraordinary or worthless. There is little space for nuance, humility, or shared success. Because of this mindset, narcissists may fantasize constantly about becoming famous, wealthy, powerful, or admired. These fantasies are not simply dreams of success. They function as psychological armor against feelings of inadequacy. If they can convince themselves and others that they are exceptional, the painful possibility of being ordinary never has to be faced. This intense need for superiority often creates rivalry with others. Narcissists frequently measure their worth by comparing themselves to people around them. Psychologists call this narcissistic comparison dynamics. If someone else achieves success, whether professionally, socially, or personally, the narcissist may experience it not as inspiration, but as a threat. Instead of celebrating another person's accomplishments, they may attempt to diminish them, criticize them, or claim partial credit. To outsiders, this behavior can seem petty or hostile, but psychologically, it reflects the narcissist's struggle to maintain their fragile self-esteem. For the victim, the emotional impact can be profound. Achievements that should bring joy may instead trigger criticism or sabotage. Survivors often describe feeling as if they must hide their successes to avoid provoking the narcissist's jealousy. Psychologists warn that this dynamic gradually erodes self-confidence. When someone repeatedly minimizes your achievements, the mind can begin to internalize that dismissal. Over time, victims may unconsciously shrink themselves to maintain peace. When a narcissist realizes they can no longer control you, something shifts dramatically. Psychologists often describe this moment as a narcissistic threat response. As long as you comply, admire, or accommodate them, the relationship may remain relatively stable, even pleasant at times. But the moment you resist their demands, set a boundary, or challenge their version of reality, the narcissist may interpret that action not simply as disagreement, but as a personal attack on their identity. From their perspective, control equals validation. When control disappears, their fragile sense of self feels exposed. That is why many survivors describe the experience as if a quiet tension suddenly escalated into emotional warfare. Psychologists explain that the narcissist's retaliation, anger, coldness, manipulation, or revenge is often less about hurting you and more about restoring their wounded self-image. Unfortunately, the person standing closest to them becomes the battlefield. This reaction can feel bewildering and deeply painful. You may have offered feedback carefully, perhaps even lovingly, hoping to improve the relationship. Yet, instead of reflection or dialogue, the response becomes hostility. Psychologists note that in narcissistic personalities, criticism rarely lands as constructive information. Instead, it is processed through what clinicians call defensive self-protection. Because the narcissist's identity is built around appearing superior or flawless, even gentle criticism can feel like humiliation. As a result, attempts to help them learn from the experience often fail. The narcissist may deny responsibility, distort the story, or turn the blame back onto you. For the victim, the healthiest strategy is often not persuasion but psychological distance, recognizing that reasoning with someone whose identity depends on never being wrong can become an exhausting and unwinnable battle. Another painful paradox psychologists frequently observe is that narcissists struggle deeply with forgiveness, especially forgiving themselves. At first glance, this seems strange. Narcissists often appear arrogant or unapologetic. Yet beneath that exterior lies a complicated emotional landscape. Many clinicians believe that narcissistic personalities are not driven by genuine self-love, but by a defensive shield against profound self-criticism or shame. In other words, the grandiosity may actually be hiding a fragile internal narrative that says, If I am not exceptional, I am nothing. When people carry that kind of internal pressure, mistakes become unbearable. Instead of acknowledging faults and forgiving themselves, narcissists often bury those feelings, deny them, or project them onto others. This dynamic creates a confusing emotional expectation. Society sometimes tells survivors that forgiveness should flow from the abused to the abuser, that letting go of resentment is the path to healing. Psychologists agree that forgiveness can be healing, but they also emphasize an important distinction. Forgiveness does not require reconciliation or continued exposure to harm. Narcissists themselves rarely engage in the difficult process of self-reflection and self-forgiveness. Instead, they often cope by minimizing their mistakes, rewriting events, or hiding painful truths from themselves. Some store these contradictions quietly in what psychologists call psychological compartments, mental spaces where uncomfortable truths are sealed away to preserve the narcissist's self-image. Once you begin recognizing these patterns, the narcissist's powerful facade can start to crack. Psychologists sometimes refer to this moment as the collapse of the illusion. For a long time, the narcissist may have seemed confident, charismatic, even impressive. But with deeper understanding, you begin to see the defensive structure beneath the charm. You realize that much of their identity is built on maintaining appearances rather than confronting reality. And this realization can be both liberating and heartbreaking. It becomes clear that the narcissist struggles not only to empathize with others, but often to show compassion toward themselves. Another important psychological pattern emerges in the world narcissists create around themselves. Many narcissistic individuals possess remarkable charisma. They can tell captivating stories about their past struggles, heroic achievements, or extraordinary ambitions. Psychologists note that this storytelling often forms part of the narcissist's self-mythology, a narrative designed to present them as a misunderstood hero or tragic protagonist. When people first encounter these stories, they may feel drawn in. The narcissist's confidence can be magnetic. Their vision may seem bold and inspiring. For individuals who already struggle with self-doubt, this confidence can feel almost intoxicating. But over time, the narrative begins to shift. The heroic story that once inspired admiration may slowly reveal inconsistencies. Psychologists explain that narcissists sometimes rely on selective storytelling, highlighting events that elevate their status while ignoring facts that challenge their image. When someone questions the narrative or introduces a different perspective, the narcissist may react defensively or aggressively. Their carefully constructed worldview cannot easily tolerate contradictions. As a result, people who once admired them may eventually withdraw, not because they suddenly became hostile, but because the relationship demands constant participation in the narcissist's illusion. Perhaps the most painful element of narcissistic relationships is the struggle with empathy. Many survivors describe a chilling emotional distance, as if the narcissist cannot truly feel what others are experiencing. Psychologists clarify that empathy exists on a spectrum. Some narcissistic individuals can intellectually understand that another person is suffering, but they struggle to feel the emotional resonance that motivates compassionate action. This condition is sometimes described as impaired emotional empathy. When empathy is limited in this way, relationships can become profoundly one-sided. The narcissist's needs dominate the emotional landscape, while the feelings of others fade into the background. The consequences can be deeply damaging. When someone repeatedly dismisses your feelings or treats your struggles as unimportant, your nervous system begins to adapt. Psychologists often see survivors develop patterns of hypervigilance, constantly scanning for signs of the narcissist's mood shifts. Others begin minimizing their own needs, believing that expressing vulnerability will only lead to rejection or ridicule. Over time, this can erode a person's sense of identity. Healing requires gradually reclaiming that identity, relearning that your emotions are valid, your experiences matter, and your worth does not depend on someone else's approval. If this exploration helped you understand narcissistic behavior and its psychological impact, consider taking a moment to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who might benefit from these insights. Conversations about psychology become more powerful when people share their experiences. So feel free to leave a comment and tell us what resonated with you or what questions you still have. Your voice may help someone else recognize patterns they have been struggling to understand. And if you found this discussion meaningful, explore the other videos on the channel for deeper insights into relationships, emotional health, and the psychology that shapes our lives.